The look of shock on Jessica's face when I walked into her house warming party with printed screenshots of every fake profile she'd created was worth 8 years of friendship betrayal. By the time the night was over, everyone knew the truth about how my best friend had been systematically destroying my dating life, and I had reclaimed not just my romantic future, but my entire sense of self-worth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and 6 months ago I thought I was cursed when it came to dating. Every promising conversation on dating apps would mysteriously fizzle out just when things were getting interesting. Every coffee date that seemed to go well would end with radio silence. Every time I felt a genuine connection forming, the other person would vanish like smoke, leaving me questioning everything from my conversation skills to my profile photos. What I didn't know was that my dating disasters weren't the result of bad luck or personal shortcomings. They were the carefully orchestrated work of someone I trusted more than anyone else in the world. Someone who knew my insecurities, my hopes, my deepest fears about finding love. Someone who had been sitting across from me every Tuesday morning at Brew Bytes coffee shop, listening to me analyze failed connections while secretly being the architect of every single disappointment. Jessica Martinez had been my best friend since our sophomore year at UT Austin, when we were randomly assigned as roommates in a cramped dorm that smelled perpetually of burnt popcorn and cheap vanilla candles. She was the kind of person who could walk into any room and immediately become its center of gravity, with her infectious laugh and the way she made everyone feel like they were the most interesting person she'd ever met. I was quieter, more analytical, the type who preferred small gatherings over parties and meaningful conversations over small talk. We balanced each other perfectly, or so I thought. Over the years, our friendship had become the cornerstone of my life in Austin. When I landed my job at Pulse Media, a digital marketing agency in the domain, Jess was the first person I called. When she decided to leave her corporate graphic design job to freelance from her home studio, I helped her set up her business plan and website. We celebrated each other's victories, commiserated over professional setbacks, and maintained the kind of daily communication that made us feel more like sisters than friends. Our Tuesday coffee ritual at Brew Bytes had started 3 years ago when I began seriously trying to date again after a long relationship ended. The industrial chic coffee shop with its exposed brick walls and reclaimed wood tables had become our unofficial therapy session location. I would arrive with stories of awkward first dates or promising conversations that led nowhere, and Jess would listen with the perfect combination of sympathy and advice, always ready with insights about what went wrong or suggestions for how to improve my approach. She had a gift for reading people and situations that I deeply admired. When I showed her screenshots of conversations that had gone cold, she could pinpoint exactly where things had shifted. When I was debating whether to message someone first or wait for them to reach out, her instincts were usually spot on. I trusted her judgment about dating more than my own, which in retrospect should have been my first red flag. The pattern of my dating failures had become so predictable that we developed a shorthand for discussing them. There was the enthusiastic start, where matches would message me immediately after we connected, asking thoughtful questions about my interests and suggesting we meet soon. Then came the momentum build, with increasingly flirty exchanges and concrete plans being made for dates. Finally, the disappearing act, where responses would become shorter and less frequent before stopping entirely, usually right after I had started feeling genuinely excited about the possibility. Initially, I blamed myself. Maybe I was coming on too strong, or not strong enough. Maybe my profile photos were misleading, or my bio wasn't compelling enough. I analyzed every conversation like I was preparing a marketing campaign presentation at work, looking for patterns and opportunities for optimization. Jess would help with this analysis, suggesting tweaks to my approach, or pointing out moments where she thought I might have misread signals. The self-doubt began eating away at my confidence in all areas of life. If I couldn't even maintain interest from men who had already expressed attraction to me, what did that say about my desirability? If my conversation skills were so poor that people would rather ghost me than continue talking, how was I supposed to succeed in client presentations at work? The dating failures started bleeding into my professional confidence, making me second-guess instincts that had previously served me well. Jess was incredibly supportive during this period of growing insecurity. She would remind me of my accomplishments, compliment my appearance, and share stories of her own dating mishaps to make me feel less alone. She had been in a long-term relationship with her college boyfriend until about a year ago, so she was navigating the Austin dating scene alongside me, though with seemingly much better results. While I collected rejections and ghostings, she had a steady stream of second and third dates, casual relationships that lasted a few months, and generally positive experiences with online dating. Her success only amplified my sense of failure. We were both attractive women, in our late 20s with interesting careers and active social lives, living in a city known for its young, educated population. If she could find connection and I couldn't, the problem had to be with me specifically. This logic seemed so obvious that I never questioned it, even when small details about her dating life didn't quite add up. For instance, she rarely showed me photos of the men she was seeing, claiming she preferred to keep her romantic life private until things got serious. When I asked to meet her dates, or suggested double dates, she would deflect with excuses about not wanting to jinx new relationships by introducing them to friends too early. She never seemed to struggle with the same communication issues that plagued my connections, yet she couldn't offer concrete advice about how to maintain momentum beyond vague suggestions about being myself and letting things develop naturally. The breaking point came on a particularly brutal Tuesday morning in late September. I had spent the previous week exchanging messages with David Kim, a software engineer who worked downtown and shared my love of hiking and obscure documentaries. Our conversation had been the best I'd had in months, full of genuine laughter and the kind of intellectual chemistry that made me stay up too late just to keep talking to him. We had made plans to meet for drinks at Roosevelt Room that Friday, and I was more excited about a first date than I had been in over a year. Then on Thursday afternoon, David's messages stopped mid-conversation. We had been discussing our favorite hiking trails around Austin, making plans to explore some of the more remote spots together if our date went well. His last message had been enthusiastic, asking about my experience with overnight camping and suggesting we could plan a weekend trip to Lost Maples if we enjoyed each other's company. I had responded with equal enthusiasm, sharing photos from a recent camping trip and expressing excitement about having someone who appreciated outdoor adventures, but my response sat there, marked as read, with no reply. Friday came and went with no word from Dave. By Sunday I was oscillating between hurt and confusion, wondering what I had said wrong or if something had happened to him. The silence was particularly painful because our connection had felt so genuine and mutual. Sitting across from Jess at our usual corner table at Brew Bytes, I found myself close to tears as I recounted the latest disappointment. The coffee shop was busy with its typical Tuesday morning crowd of freelancers and remote workers, the sound of steaming milk and grinding coffee beans, providing a soundtrack to my romantic failure. Jess listened with her usual attentiveness, her dark eyes full of sympathy as she scrolled through screenshots. I showed her of my conversation with David. "This is so weird," she said, shaking her head as she read through our message history. "You guys had such good chemistry. I don't understand why he would just disappear like that, especially after making concrete plans." She paused at one of his messages, the one where he had suggested the camping trip, and her expression grew thoughtful. "You know, this reminds me of something I read about online dating psychology. Sometimes when connections feel too intense, too quickly, people get scared and pull back. Maybe you were both moving too fast." Her explanation felt reasonable, even if it didn't ease the sting of rejection. I trusted her insights about human behavior, and her theory provided at least some framework for understanding what had happened. But as we continued talking, something about her reaction nagged at me. She seemed almost too prepared with explanations, too ready with psychological frameworks that absolved both David and me of any real wrongdoing while still leaving me as the person who had somehow contributed to the failure. "Maybe I should try to message him one more time," I suggested, though I felt pathetic for even considering it. "Just something casual, no pressure, to see if he's okay or if something came up." Jess shook her head firmly. "Don't do that, Sarah. If a guy is interested, he'll reach out. Chasing him will only make you look desperate and push him further away. You need to have more confidence in your worth and not beg for attention from someone who clearly isn't ready for what you have to offer. Her advice was sound, the kind of wisdom I had come to rely on over years of friendship, but something about the way she delivered it felt different that morning, more rehearsed than usual. There was an undercurrent of certainty in her voice that struck me as odd, considering she was theorizing about a stranger's motivations, based on screenshots of conversations she hadn't been part of. As we finished our coffee and prepared to leave for our respective workdays, Jess squeezed my hand across the table. "You're an amazing woman, Sarah. The right person will see that and won't run away when things get real. Don't let these losers make you doubt yourself." Her words were meant to be comforting, but they highlighted something that had been bothering me for months. Every failed connection was dismissed as the other person's loss, their inability to recognize my worth, their emotional unavailability or poor communication skill. While this framing protected my ego in the short term, it also meant I never received actionable feedback about how to improve my approach or identify warning signs earlier in the process. Walking back to my loft apartment in East Austin after we parted ways, I found myself questioning not just David's disappearance, but the entire pattern of my dating experiences. The consistency of the failures was starting to feel statistically improbable. Austin was a city full of educated, emotionally intelligent people looking for genuine connections. The idea that I would encounter such a high percentage of emotionally unavailable or commitment-phobic men seemed increasingly unlikely. My apartment, a converted warehouse space with floor-to-ceiling windows and polished concrete floors, usually felt like a sanctuary after difficult conversations. But that morning, it felt lonely in a way that emphasized my romantic isolation. I stood in my kitchen, making another cup of coffee I didn't really want, and tried to shake the feeling that I was missing something important about my situation. The rational part of my brain, the same analytical thinking that made me successful at developing marketing strategies for clients, kept returning to the consistency of the pattern. In digital marketing, when we saw consistent trends across different campaigns or demographics, we looked for common variables that might be influencing outcomes. We didn't accept repetitive failures without investigating potential systemic issues. But my personal life felt too emotionally charged to apply the same analytical rigor. The vulnerability of dating, the exposure of putting yourself out there and being rejected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Made it difficult to maintain the objective perspective I could bring to professional challenge. Instead of looking for patterns and testing hypotheses, I was accepting explanations that felt emotionally satisfying even if they didn't hold up to scrutiny. That afternoon at work, I found myself distracted during client meetings and strategy sessions. My mind kept returning to David's abrupt disappearance and Jess's quick explanations for patterns that were starting to feel less like bad luck and more like something else entirely. Mike Thompson, my colleague who handled the technical side of our digital marketing campaigns, noticed my distraction during a team meeting about campaign analytics. "You okay, Sarah?" he asked as we walked back to our desks after presenting quarterly results to a client. "You seem like you're somewhere else today." Mike was one of those rare colleagues who had become a genuine friend over the 3 years we'd worked together. His background in cybersecurity before joining Pulse Media made him invaluable for understanding the technical aspects of digital marketing. But it also meant he approached problems with the kind of systematic thinking I was struggling to apply to my personal life. "Just dating drama," I said, settling into my desk chair and staring at the campaign performance data spreadsheet open on my computer screen. Same old story of connections that seem promising and then just evaporate for no apparent reason. Mike leaned against my desk, his expression sympathetic but also curious. "That's been happening a lot lately, hasn't it? I remember you mentioning similar situations over the past few months." His observation struck me because Mike wasn't someone who typically paid attention to office gossip or personal drama. If he had noticed the pattern from my casual mentions, it suggested the frequency was unusual enough to register with someone who wasn't even directly involved in my dating life. "Yeah, it's been a rough stretch," I admitted. "My friend Jess thinks I'm just encountering a lot of emotionally unavailable guys. But sometimes I wonder if there's something I'm doing wrong that I can't see." Mike's expression shifted slightly, taking on the focused look he got when analyzing campaign data or troubleshooting technical issues. Have you considered that it might not be about what you're doing wrong but about external factors you're not aware of? His question lingered in my mind for the rest of the afternoon, introducing a possibility I hadn't seriously considered. What if my dating failures weren't the result of personal shortcomings or bad luck with emotionally unavailable men? What if there were external factors influencing the outcomes? Variables I wasn't accounting for because I didn't know they existed. The idea felt both intriguing and terrifying. If there were external factors at play, it might mean my romantic failures weren't indicative of fundamental problems with my desirability or communication skill. But it would also mean that someone or something was interfering with my attempts to find connection, which raised questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. That evening, alone in my apartment with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant, I decided to do something I had been avoiding for months. Instead of accepting Jess's explanations for my dating failures or continuing to blame myself for patterns I couldn't understand, I was going to approach the situation like the analytical professional I was in every other area of my life. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet, something I did instinctively when facing complex problems at work. Column headers included names, dating platforms, conversation duration, level of apparent interest, and circumstances of the final interaction. As I began entering data from the past 6 months of dating attempts, a picture emerged that was even more concerning than I had realized. The pattern wasn't just consistent, it was almost perfectly predictable. Every connection followed the same trajectory, with enthusiasm peaking just before plans were made for in-person meetings, followed by abrupt communication cutoffs. The timing was so precise that it felt less like coincidence and more like intervention. Staring at the data laid out in neat rows and columns, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in my apartment. For the first time since my dating struggles began, I was looking at evidence that suggested my failures might not be personal shortcomings or bad luck. They might be the result of deliberate sabotage. The question that terrified me most was who would have both the motivation and the means to systematically destroy my romantic prospect. But as I sat there in the glow of my laptop screen, surrounded by the comfortable familiarity of my home, one possibility kept rising to the surface, no matter how much I tried to push it away. The only person who knew about every match, every conversation, every plan I made was the same person who had been offering explanations and comfort through every failure. The person I trusted most in the world, who had access to my phone, my accounts, my deepest insecurities about dating and relationships, my best friend Jack. The thought felt like betrayal just for considering it, but once it entered my mind, I couldn't shake the growing certainty that I was finally looking in the right direction for answers. The comfortable explanation that had protected our friendship for months was about to crumble, and I had the terrible feeling that everything I thought I knew about my life was about to change forever. The next morning arrived with that peculiar clarity that comes after a sleepless night of uncomfortable realizations. I had spent hours staring at my spreadsheet, adding details I remembered about each failed connection, and the pattern became increasingly undeniable. Every single dating disaster had one common thread that I had been blind to until now: Jessica's intimate knowledge of every detail. I sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop open, nursing my third cup of coffee while sunlight streamed through the tall windows of my East Austin loft. The industrial space that usually energized me with its open layout and modern aesthetic now felt too exposed, too vulnerable. Every shadow seemed to hold the possibility of deception, every familiar comfort now suspect in ways I couldn't have imagined 24 hours early. The data told a story I didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. David Kim wasn't an isolated incident of bad timing or emotional unavailability. He was part of a systematic pattern that stretched back 6 months, involving dozens of promising connections that had all ended in inexplicably similar ways. Men who had shown genuine interest, made concrete plans, and then vanished without explanation, always at the precise moment when virtual connection was about to become physical reality. My phone buzzed with a text from Jess, and I felt my stomach lurch with a combination of guilt and suspicion that made me question everything I thought I knew about our friendship. The message was typical of our daily communication: a good morning greeting accompanied by a meme about coffee addiction, and a promise to call later to check on how I was feeling after yesterday's David disappointment. The casual tone that had always felt supportive now seemed calculated in ways that made my skin crawl. I couldn't respond immediately, couldn't pretend everything was normal when my mind was spinning with questions that threatened to upend 8 years of trust and shared history. Instead, I closed my laptop and decided to do something I had never done before in our friendship. I was going to investigate Jessica Martinez like she was a marketing campaign with suspicious metrics, using the same analytical tools that had built my career to examine the person I had trusted most. At Pulse Media, I settled into my desk with a determination that Mike Thompson noticed immediately. He appeared at my cubicle with 2 cups of coffee from the expensive machine in the break room, his expression curious but supportive. "You look like someone who spent the night solving the mysteries of the universe," he said, setting 1 cup on my desk and leaning against the partition that separated our workspaces. "Please tell me you figured out what's been causing your dating disasters, because I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and something doesn't add up." His words sent a jolt through me because they confirmed that my suspicions weren't just the product of an overactive imagination or sleep deprivation. Someone else had noticed inconsistencies in my situation, someone with no emotional investment in protecting my relationship with Jeff. "What kind of things don't add up?" I asked, grateful for his analytical perspective, and relieved to have someone I could discuss my growing concerns with. Mike pulled up a chair, his expression shifting into the focused mode he adopted when tackling complex technical problems. "Well, you're smart, funny, attractive, and successful. You work in digital marketing, so you understand online communication better than most people. You're not clingy or desperate, and from what I've observed, you have realistic expectations about dating. The statistical probability of encountering this many emotionally unavailable or commitment-phobic men in a city like Austin is extremely low." His assessment was clinical but validating, confirming that my failures couldn't be explained by personal shortcomings or extraordinary bad luck. "But that leaves the question of what external factors could be causing such consistent outcomes," I said, testing the waters to see how far he was willing to follow this line of reasoning. "Exactly," Mike nodded, his cybersecurity background evident in his systematic approach to the problem. "In my previous work, when we saw patterns like this, it usually indicated some form of interference or manipulation, someone with access to information and the ability to influence outcome." The word manipulation hung in the air between us, giving name to the possibility I had been circling around without wanting to acknowledge directly. "Hypothetically," I said carefully, "if someone wanted to sabotage another person's dating life, how would they go about it?" Mike's expression grew serious as he considered the question. "There are several approaches depending on their technical skills and access to the target's information. They could create fake profiles to intercept matches, contact potential dates directly with false information, or hack into dating accounts to alter conversations or delete messages. The most effective method would probably be impersonation, reaching out to matches as if they were the target and saying things that would end the connection." The clinical description of digital sabotage made my stomach turn, but it also provided a framework for understanding how my dating life could have been systematically destroyed. Someone with basic technical skills and detailed knowledge of my dating activities could easily derail every promising connection without leaving obvious traces. "Would there be evidence of this kind of interference?" I asked, my heart pounding as I contemplated the implications of what we were discussing. "Definitely," Mike replied with the confidence of someone who had spent years tracking digital footprints, IP addresses, email headers, account activity logs, timing patterns in message. "Digital manipulation always leaves traces if you know where to look." His words sparked a possibility that felt both thrilling and terrifying. If Jess had been sabotaging my dating life, there would be evidence. Digital breadcrumbs that could prove or disprove my suspicions, concrete data that would either vindicate my growing paranoia or force me to confront the reality that I was projecting my failures onto an innocent friend. "Mike," I said slowly, "would you be willing to help me investigate some? As a friend, not as a work project, I need someone with your technical expertise to help me trace some suspicious activity." His expression shifted to one of focused interest, the same look he got when presented with a challenging cybersecurity puzzle. "Of course." What kind of suspicious activity are we talking about? I took a deep breath, knowing that once I spoke my suspicions aloud, there would be no taking them back. I think someone has been intercepting my dating app matches and sabotaging my connection. Someone who knows all the details about my dating life and has the technical skills to create convincing fake profiles. Mike was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what I was suggesting. Sarah, that's a serious accusation. If you're right, it means someone close to you has been systematically manipulating your personal life for months. Are you prepared for what we might find? His question forced me to confront the magnitude of what I was contemplating. If my suspicions were correct, it would mean that Jessica, the person I trusted most in the world, had been deliberately sabotaging my happiness, for reasons I couldn't begin to understand. It would mean that every conversation we had shared about my dating failures had been an elaborate performance, with her offering comfort for pain she had caused. I need to know the truth, I said finally, whatever it is. The investigation began immediately, with Mike helping me compile information that could be analyzed for patterns and digital fingerprints. We started with my dating app accounts, examining message histories and connection logs for any irregularity. The process was methodical and time-consuming, requiring us to cross-reference timestamps and activity patterns across multiple platforms. What we discovered in the first hour of analysis was more disturbing than I had anticipated. Several of my matches had received messages that appeared to come from my accounts, but that I had never sent. The content of these mystery messages was subtle but devastating, expressing disinterest, canceling plans, or revealing personal information that would have ended any romantic possibility. Look at this, Mike said, pointing to a message thread with Alex Rodriguez, a teacher I had been excited to meet for drinks 2 weeks earlier. According to the app logs, you sent him a message saying you'd decided to get back together with your ex-boyfriend and weren't ready for dating. But there's no record of that message in your sent folder. The phantom message was sophisticated in its cruelty, designed to end the connection in a way that would spare Alex's feelings, while making me seem unavailable rather than uninterested. It was the kind of thoughtful deception that required intimate knowledge of my communication style and emotional pattern. We found similar messages across multiple platforms and dating relationships, each one crafted to seem plausible while effectively terminating any possibility of romantic development. The timing was precise, always occurring just before planned in-person meetings, ensuring that virtual connections never had the opportunity to become real relationships. Whoever is doing this knows you very well, Mike observed as we compiled evidence of the sabotage. They understand your communication style, your values, and your approach to dating well enough to impersonate you convincingly. This isn't random harassment or catfishing for financial gain. This is personal. The personalized nature of the sabotage was what made it so heartbreaking. Someone who knew my hopes and fears about finding love had been using that knowledge to ensure I remained isolated and disappointed. The betrayal felt deeper than romantic rejection because it came from a place of trust and vulnerability. As we dug deeper into the digital evidence, Mike began tracing IP addresses and analyzing account access patterns. The technical aspects of the investigation were beyond my expertise, but I watched him work with growing dread, knowing that each piece of evidence was bringing us closer to identifying the person responsible. Sarah, Mike said after an hour of intense concentration on his computer screen, I need to ask you a difficult question. Who has physical access to your phone and computer? Who knows your passwords or has seen you enter them? The question hit me like a physical blow because I already knew the answer. Jessica had been to my apartment countless times over the years, had borrowed my laptop when hers was being repaired, had seen me unlock my phone hundreds of times during our coffee dates and friend gatherings. She knew my social media passwords, because we had helped each other manage accounts during busy periods. And she understood my daily routines well enough to know when I would be distracted or away from my devices. My best friend Jess, I admitted quietly. She has access to everything. Mike's expression grew grave as he continued his analysis. I'm finding multiple IP addresses associated with the fake messages, but they're all clustered in the same geographic area. North Austin, Cedar Park area specifically. Do you know anyone who lives in that part of the city? My blood ran cold because I knew exactly who lived in Cedar Park. Jessica had moved there 6 months ago when she left her corporate job to freelance, buying a small house with the money she had saved during her relationship with her college boyfriend. The timing aligned perfectly with when my dating disasters had begun. "That's where Jess lives," I whispered, the words feeling like a confession of something terrible. The investigation continued for another hour, with Mike tracing digital footprints and building a comprehensive picture of the sabotage campaign. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction, creating an undeniable pattern that connected Jessica's location, her technical skills as a graphic designer, and her intimate knowledge of my dating life. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Mike said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "The evidence is conclusive. The fake messages, the account access, the IP addresses, they all trace back to the same location in Cedar Park. Someone in that house has been systematically sabotaging your dating life for the past 6 months." The confirmation of my worst suspicions felt both validating and devastating. I had been right to trust my instincts about the improbability of my consistent failures, but being right meant confronting a betrayal so profound that it threatened to reshape my understanding of friendship, trust, and my own judgment about people. Sitting in my office chair, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my workplace, I felt fundamentally displaced in ways that had nothing to do with physical location. The person I had turned to for support through every romantic disappointment had been the architect of that disappointment. The friend who had offered explanations and comfort had been performing elaborate theater, playing both the sympathetic audience and the unseen villain. The psychological manipulation was almost more disturbing than the technical sabotage. Jessica hadn't just interfered with my dating life, she had positioned herself as my emotional support system throughout the process, ensuring that every failure would drive me closer to her rather than inspiring me to investigate external causes. She had been my confidant and my saboteur simultaneously, creating a dependency that served her purposes while isolating me from genuine romantic connections. "What do I do now?" I asked Mike, feeling lost despite having the evidence I had saw. "How do I confront someone who has been lying to me for months? How do I even begin to understand why she would do this?" Mike's expression was sympathetic but determined. "First, we document everything we've found. Print out all the evidence, save the digital files, make sure we have a complete record of the sabotage campaign. Then you decide how you want to handle the confrontation. But Sarah, you need to be prepared for the possibility that this goes deeper than just dating interference. Someone who would manipulate you this extensively might have been deceptive about other aspects of your friendship as well." His warning sent chills through me as I contemplated the implication. If Jessica could maintain such an elaborate deception about my dating life while appearing to be my most supportive friend, what other aspects of our relationship might have been carefully constructed lies? How much of our 8-year friendship had been genuine, and how much had been performance designed to serve purposes I couldn't begin to understand? The rest of the workday passed in a haze of shocked processing and careful evidence compilation. Mike helped me create comprehensive documentation of the sabotage, including screenshots, IP address logs, and a timeline that connected every suspicious incident to Jessica's location and access to my information. The evidence was thorough and damning, leaving no room for alternative explanations or coincidental connections. As evening approached, I faced the terrifying prospect of returning to my normal routine while harboring knowledge that changed everything about my closest friendship. My phone had been buzzing intermittently with messages from Jessica, casual check-ins and funny memes that now felt like calculated attempts to maintain her facade of innocent support. I couldn't bring myself to respond with the same casual warmth that had characterized our communication for years. Every message felt like a lie by omission. Every expression of concern now seemed like performance art designed to cover her tracks. The emotional whiplash of discovering such a profound betrayal was exhausting, leaving me feeling simultaneously angry and heartbroken. That evening, alone in my apartment with all the evidence spread across my dining table, I tried to understand the psychology behind Jessica's action. What could motivate someone to systematically destroy their best friend's romantic prospects, while offering comfort and support through the resulting disappointment? The level of sustained deception required seemed almost sociopathic in its calculation and cruelty. I thought back through our friendship, looking for signs I had missed, or moments that might have revealed her true feelings about my romantic success. There had been occasional comments that seemed supportive but carried undertones of criticism or doubt, suggestions that maybe I was being too picky, or that my standards were unrealistic for someone with my background. Questions about whether I really wanted a serious relationship, or if I was just enjoying the attention from dating apps. None of these comments had seemed malicious at the time, presented as they were within the context of loving friendship and genuine concern for my happiness, but viewed through the lens of her systematic sabotage, they took on a different meaning. Perhaps she had been testing the waters, seeing how much doubt she could introduce about my romantic prospects without arousing suspicion. The motivation remained unclear, but the evidence of systematic betrayal was overwhelming. Jessica Martinez, my best friend and confidant, had been deliberately sabotaging my attempts to find love while positioning herself as my primary source of emotional support. The discovery felt like learning that the ground beneath my feet had never been solid, that every step I had taken in our friendship had been built on carefully maintained lies. As I prepared for bed that night, surrounded by printed evidence of betrayal, I knew that everything was about to change. The comfortable routines of our friendship, the weekly coffee dates and daily communication, the shared experiences and mutual support, all of it was now suspect in ways that made me question my ability to judge character and trust. Tomorrow would bring the terrible necessity of confrontation, of looking someone I loved in the eye and demanding explanations for inexplicable cruelty. But tonight I grieved for the friendship I thought I had, for the person I believed Jessica to be, and for the naive trust that had made such an elaborate deception possible. The woman who had entered this investigation looking for answers to her romantic failures was about to discover that the real problem had never been her desirability or communication skills. The problem had been trusting someone who smiled while systematically destroying her happiness, someone who had turned friendship into a weapon and love into a tool for control. The evidence was clear, the pattern undeniable, and the confrontation inevitable. All that remained was finding the courage to face the truth about someone who had been lying to me, with every expression of concern, every offer of support, every moment of shared laughter and apparent friendship. The investigation was complete, but the real reckoning was just beginning. The morning of Jessica's housewarming party arrived with the weight of impending confrontation pressing down on my chest like a physical force. 3 days had passed since Mike and I had compiled the damning evidence of her systematic sabotage, 3 days of careful planning and emotional preparation for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. The invitation to celebrate her new home in Cedar Park had arrived 2 weeks ago, back when I still believed she was my loyal best friend rather than the architect of my romantic misery. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror holding the printed evidence folder that contained screenshots, IP address logs, and a detailed timeline of Jessica's deception. The irony wasn't lost on me, that I was preparing to attend a party celebrating the very house from which she had launched her campaign against my happiness. The address on the invitation matched perfectly with the geographic data Mike had traced from the fake messages, providing one final confirmation of her guilt. The past 3 days had been a masterclass in psychological torture as I maintained normal communication with Jessica while knowing the truth about her betrayal. She had texted me daily with her usual mix of friendship maintenance and fake concern about my dating life. Each message felt like a small knife twisting in an open wound, especially when she expressed excitement about seeing me at the party and catching up on my latest romantic adventure. I had practiced this confrontation in my mind dozens of times, imagining different scenarios and preparing for various responses she might give. Would she deny everything despite the overwhelming evidence? Would she break down and confess, perhaps offering some explanation that made her actions seem less monstrous? Would she become angry and defensive, attacking me for investigating her? None of the scenarios I envisioned felt adequate preparation for the reality of confronting someone who had so completely violated my trust. Mike had offered to accompany me to the party for moral support, but I knew this was something I needed to handle alone. This wasn't just about exposing Jessica's deception to others. It was about reclaiming my own power and agency in a situation where I had been manipulated for months. The confrontation needed to happen on my terms, with my words, expressing my own anger and disappointment without hiding behind someone else's technical expertise. The drive to Cedar Park felt like traveling to another world, leaving behind the familiar streets of East Austin for the suburban sprawl where Jessica had built her new life. Her house was exactly what I had expected from her social media posts. A charming craftsman-style home with a wraparound porch and carefully maintained landscaping that spoke to her eye for aesthetic detail. Cars lined the street, indicating that the party was already in full swing when I arrived fashionably late at 7:30. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted from the backyard as I approached the front door, evidence folder tucked discreetly in my oversized purse, alongside a bottle of wine that felt like a prop in an elaborate performance. I could hear Jessica's distinctive laugh rising above the general noise, that infectious sound that had drawn me to her friendship 8 years ago and that now made my stomach clench with anticipation and dread. Emma Foster answered the door when I knocked, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure at seeing me. Emma was part of our extended friend group from college, someone who had maintained connections with both Jessica and me without being particularly close to either of us. Her presence at the party reminded me that whatever happened tonight would likely have ripple effects throughout our shared social circle. "Sarah, I'm so glad you made it," Emma said, giving me a warm hug and accepting the wine bottle I offered. "Jess has been asking about you all evening. She's out back playing hostess and holding court as usual. You know how she gets at parties." I did know how Jessica got at parties, which was exactly why I had chosen this setting for our confrontation. She thrived on being the center of attention, surrounded by admirers and basking in the warm glow of social success. Having her elaborate deception exposed in front of the very people she was trying to impress would maximize the impact of the revelation while ensuring that she couldn't simply dismiss or minimize what I had discovered. The backyard was beautifully decorated with string lights and carefully arranged seating areas that showcased Jessica's talent for creating inviting spaces. About 20 people mingled around a fire pit and outdoor bar setup, most of them familiar faces from our college years and current social circle. The atmosphere was relaxed and celebratory, with guests admiring the house and congratulating Jessica on her successful transition to homeownership and freelance work. I spotted Jessica immediately, standing near the outdoor kitchen island and gesturing animatedly as she told a story that had her small audience laughing appreciative. She looked radiant in a flowing dress that complemented her olive skin tone, her dark hair styled in loose waves that caught the warm glow of the string lights. For a moment, seeing her in her element, I felt a pang of grief for the friendship I had thought we shared. She noticed me almost immediately, her face breaking into the brilliant smile that had always made me feel special and valued. "Sarah," she called out, excusing herself from her conversation, and practically bouncing across the patio to embrace me. "I was starting to worry you weren't coming. You've been so quiet the past few days." Her concern seemed genuine, her embrace warm and familiar, and for a brief moment, I questioned whether I was making a terrible mistake. Could someone who seemed so genuinely happy to see me really be capable of the systematic cruelty Mike and I had documented? But then I remembered the evidence folder in my purse and steeled myself against the emotional manipulation that had kept me blind to her true nature for so long. "I've had a lot on my mind," I replied truthfully, accepting a glass of wine from the bottle Emma had already opened and poured. "Work has been intense, and you know how I get when I'm processing things." Jessica nodded sympathetically, her expression shifting to the concerned friend mode I now recognized as performance art. "Still dealing with the David situation. I know that really threw you for a loop. We should definitely talk later after things calm down a bit. I've been thinking about it, and I might have some insights about what went wrong." The casual reference to David Kim, the man whose interest she had systematically destroyed while offering me comfort for the resulting disappointment, crystallized my resolve. She was still playing the role of supportive friend, still pretending to care about romantic failures she had orchestrated. The audacity of her continued deception in the face of what she had done was breathtaking. "Actually," I said, taking a sip of wine to steady my nerves, "I'd love to hear your insights. I've been doing some analysis of my dating patterns, and I think you might find the results interesting." Something flickered in Jessica's expression at my words, too brief to interpret, but significant enough to notice. "Analysis? That sounds very thorough. You know me, I'm always up for dissecting romantic disaster." Her enthusiasm for analyzing my romantic disasters now seemed grotesque rather than supportive, evidence of how thoroughly she had weaponized our friendship. But I maintained my composed exterior, knowing that the longer I could keep her comfortable and unsuspecting, the more impact the eventual revelation would have. The party continued around us as we made small talk with other guests, but I was acutely aware of Jessica's behavior in ways I had never been before. She had a talent for steering conversations away from topics that might make her uncomfortable, redirecting attention to safer subjects or other people when discussions got too personal. She was particularly skilled at managing her image, presenting herself as the perfect combination of successful, humble, and supportively interested in everyone else's lives. Watching her work the crowd with such practiced ease made me wonder how long she had been manipulating people and situations to serve her own purposes. Was I the only target of her deceptive behavior, or were there others who had suffered from her need to control and undermine? The scope of her potential manipulation was terrifying to contemplate. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying our mutual friends, and wondering what Jessica had told them about my dating struggle. Had she shared details of my failures with the same sympathetic concern she showed me directly? Had she positioned herself as the wise friend trying to help poor Sarah figure out why she couldn't maintain a relationship? The thought that my romantic disappointments had become entertainment for others, filtered through Jessica's false narrative of friendship and support, added another layer of humiliation to an already devastating betrayal. Around 9 o'clock, as the party began to reach its natural peak of energy and alcohol consumption, I decided it was time to execute the plan Mike and I had developed. The optimal moment would be when Jessica was holding court with a significant portion of the guest list, ensuring maximum witness to her exposure, while avoiding the chaos that might result from a purely private confrontation. I excused myself from a conversation about Austin's changing music scene, and retrieved my purse from inside the house, checking to make sure the evidence folder was easily accessible. My hands were shaking slightly as I practiced the opening lines I had rehearsed, knowing that once I began this confrontation, there would be no possibility of retreat or reconciliation. When I returned to the backyard, Jessica was indeed surrounded by a group of 6 or 7 people near the fire pit, regaling them with a story about a difficult freelance client that had everyone laughing at her dramatic reenactment of creative difference. The setting was perfect for what I needed to accomplish, public enough to ensure accountability, but intimate enough to allow for detailed explanation. "Jess," I said, approaching the group with what I hoped appeared to be casual confidence, "I wanted to follow up on our conversation about my dating analysis. I think everyone here might find the results interesting." The group turned to look at me with polite curiosity, probably expecting another amusing story about modern dating disasters to add to the evening's entertainment. Jessica's expression remained friendly, but I caught a flash of something uncertain in her eyes, perhaps recognition that I was behaving differently than she expected. "Oh, you don't need to bore everyone with dating drama," she said with a laugh that sounded slightly forced. "I'm sure people came here to celebrate, not psychoanalyze Sarah's love life." Her attempt to deflect was exactly what I had anticipated, and it provided the perfect opening for what came next. "Actually, I think the analysis reveals some patterns that go beyond just dating. It's really about trust, manipulation, and how well we think we know the people closest to us." The group's attention sharpened at my words, sensing that this conversation was heading somewhere more serious than typical party banter. Jessica's smile remained fixed, but I could see tension building in her posture as she realized that whatever I was about to say wouldn't be easily dismissed or redirected. "For the past 6 months," I continued, pulling the evidence folder from my purse, "I've been experiencing an unusual pattern of dating failures, promising connections that would develop momentum and then suddenly disappear right before we were supposed to meet in person. The consistency was statistically improbable, so I decided to investigate." Jessica's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, but she maintained her composure with the skill of someone practiced in deception. "Sarah, maybe we should talk about this privately," she suggested, glancing around at our increasingly interested audience. "No, I think this is exactly the right setting," I replied, opening the folder and removing the first set of screenshots. "Because what I discovered affects everyone who trusts you. It turns out that my dating failures weren't the result of bad luck or personal shortcoming. They were the result of systematic sabotage by someone with access to my accounts, my passwords, and intimate knowledge of my communication patterns. The group had gone completely silent now, their attention focused entirely on the drama unfolding before them. I could see Emma at the edge of my peripheral vision, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as she began to understand the implications of what I was revealing. Someone has been sending messages from my dating accounts to potential matches, messages designed to end connections just as they were becoming serious. Messages I never sent, containing information I never shared, timed to prevent virtual relationships from becoming real ones. I held up the screenshots Mike had helped me compile, evidence of the phantom messages that had destroyed my chances with David Kim, Alex Rodriguez, and numerous other men who had shown genuine interest in getting to know me better. The technical details were complex, but the basic concept was simple enough for everyone to understand. The IP addresses for these fake messages, traced to a specific location in Cedar Park, I continued, my voice growing stronger as I spoke the words I had practiced. They trace to this house, to someone who has been sitting across from me every Tuesday morning for months, listening to me analyze failed connections while knowing exactly why they failed. Jessica's carefully maintained facade finally cracked, her face cycling through shock, fear, and something that looked almost like relief. The performance she had sustained for so long was finally over, and the exhaustion of maintaining such an elaborate deception was visible in her slumping shoulders and defeated expression. "Sarah, I can explain," she began, but her voice lacked conviction, as if she knew that no explanation could justify what she had done. The group around us had begun to murmur among themselves, pieces of conversations I caught, indicating that they were beginning to understand the scope of what had been happening. Someone mentioned remembering Jessica's detailed knowledge of my dating life. Another person commented on how she always seemed to have explanations for my failures that deflected blame from everyone involved. "Please do explain," I said, my voice carrying a coldness I had never directed at her before. "Explain why my best friend, the person I trusted most in the world, has been systematically sabotaging my attempts to find love while positioning herself as my emotional support system. Explain why you would create fake profiles to intercept my matches, send messages designed to end promising connections, and then offer comfort for pain you had caused." The accusations hung in the air like physical blows, each one landing with the weight of months of accumulated betrayal and deception. Jessica looked around the circle of faces surrounding us, seeing judgment and disgust where she had previously enjoyed admiration and social success. "It wasn't supposed to go on this long," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started as just a way to protect you from guys who weren't serious, but then it became something else, something I couldn't control." Her attempted justification was weak and pathetic, the kind of rationalization that revealed how thoroughly she had convinced herself that her actions were somehow justified. The idea that she had been protecting me by preventing me from meeting anyone who showed interest was so twisted that it defied rational explanation. "Protect me from what?" I demanded, feeling anger rising in my chest like a physical force. "From finding someone who actually wanted to get to know me, from building the kind of relationship you systematically destroyed, from having the same opportunities for connection that everyone else takes for granted." Jessica's composure finally collapsed entirely, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to find words that could somehow make sense of what she had done. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "You're so successful, so confident, so perfect. If you found someone, if you got into a serious relationship, everything would change. Our friendship, our Tuesday coffee dates, everything we've built together." Her explanation revealed the twisted logic that had driven months of systematic cruelty. She had sabotaged my romantic prospects not out of malice, but out of desperate fear of losing her position as my primary emotional connection. She had been willing to ensure my isolation and disappointment rather than risk the possibility that I might find fulfillment with someone else. The depth of her selfishness was staggering, but it was also profoundly sad. The woman I had considered my best friend had been so insecure about her own worth, so terrified of abandonment, that she had chosen to keep me emotionally dependent rather than support my growth and happiness. "So you decided to make sure I stayed single and disappointed," I said, my voice heavy with disgust and heartbreak. "You decided that your fear of change was more important than my right to find love. You decided that keeping me isolated was worth months of lies, manipulation and systematic emotional abuse. The words emotional abuse seemed to hit her like a physical blow, perhaps forcing her to confront the reality of what her actions had constituted. She had used her position of trust to inflict psychological harm, weaponizing our friendship to serve her own emotional needs, while causing me to doubt my worth and desirability. The crowd around us had grown larger as other party guests drifted over to witness the confrontation, drawn by the obvious drama and the raised voice. I was vaguely aware of phones being raised to record the encounter, ensuring that Jessica's exposure would extend far beyond this immediate audience. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the apology felt hollow and inadequate, a reflexive response to being caught rather than genuine remorse for the harm she had caused. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I never meant for it to hurt you this much." Her claim that she hadn't meant to hurt me was perhaps the most insulting part of her entire confession. Every fake message she had sent, every connection she had sabotaged, every Tuesday morning she had listened to my disappointment while hiding her role in causing it, had been a deliberate choice to prioritize her own emotional needs over my well-being. "You spent months watching me blame myself for failures you caused," I replied, my voice shaking with fury. "You listened to me question my worth, my desirability, my ability to maintain connections, all while knowing that the problem wasn't me. You offered explanations and comfort for pain you had deliberately inflicted. If that wasn't meant to hurt me, then you're even more disconnected from reality than I thought." The confrontation had reached its emotional peak, with Jessica's deception fully exposed, and her motivations laid bare for everyone to see. The woman who had been the center of attention at her own party just hours earlier was now the subject of collective disgust and judgment, her social standing destroyed along with any pretense of being a loyal friend. Around us, the party had effectively ended as guests began making excuses to leave, clearly uncomfortable with the drama they had witnessed and uncertain about how to respond to such a profound betrayal of friendship. The celebration of Jessica's new home had become the setting for the destruction of her reputation and social connections. I looked around at the faces surrounding us, seeing a mixture of shock, disgust, and sympathy that validated my decision to handle this confrontation publicly. These people needed to know what Jessica was capable of, needed to understand that her charming exterior concealed someone willing to systematically manipulate and deceive the people closest to her. The evidence folder still lay open in my hands, containing documentation that would prevent Jessica from denying or minimizing what she had done. The technical proof was overwhelming and undeniable, leaving no room for alternative explanations or claims of misunderstanding. As the reality of her situation began to sink in, Jessica's tears transformed into something closer to panic. The social and personal consequences of her exposure were becoming clear, and she was finally beginning to understand that her actions had destroyed not just our friendship but her entire social network. The woman I had trusted most in the world stood before me, broken and exposed, her carefully constructed facade shattered beyond repair. But instead of feeling satisfaction at her downfall, I felt mostly emptiness and grief for the friendship I had thought we shared, for the person I had believed her to be, and for the naive trust that had made her deception possible. The confrontation was over, the truth revealed, and justice served. But as I prepared to leave the party and the woman who had betrayed me so completely, I knew that the real work of healing and rebuilding my life was just beginning. The silence that followed Jessica's confession stretched across the backyard like a physical presence, broken only by the distant sound of someone starting their car in the driveway. The party guests who remained stood frozen in the awkward tableau of witnessing something too intimate and devastating for casual social consumption. I could feel their discomfort radiating outward, but my focus remained entirely on the woman who had just admitted to systematically destroying my romantic life for her own selfish purposes. Jessica stood before me with mascara streaking down her cheeks, her party dress now seeming like a costume worn by someone playing at being a successful, caring friend. The transformation from charming hostess to exposed manipulator was complete, and the person I thought I had dated for 8 years had revealed herself to be a stranger capable of breathtaking cruelty disguised as concern. "You want to know what the worst part is?" I said, my voice carrying across the now quiet space with crystalline clarity. "It's not even the sabotage itself. It's that you made me believe I was the problem. For 6 months, I questioned everything about myself, my personality, my appearance, my conversation skills. my worth as a potential partner. I started doubting my professional abilities because if I couldn't even maintain interest from men who had already matched with me, how could I trust my judgment about anything? The weight of those months of self-doubt pressed down on me as I spoke, the memory of countless nights spent analyzing my perceived failures and shortcomings. Jessica's manipulation had been psychological warfare disguised as friendship designed to keep me emotionally dependent, while systematically undermining my confidence in every area of life. "Sarah, please," Jessica whispered, reaching out toward me with a trembling hand that I stepped back to avoid. "I know I messed up, but our friendship means everything to me. I was just scared of losing." Her attempt to frame this as a misguided expression of love rather than calculated emotional abuse was the final insult in a series of devastating revelations. The idea that fear of losing me had justified ensuring my isolation and disappointment revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what friendship actually meant. "You were scared of losing me?" I repeated, my voice rising with incredulous anger. "So your solution was to make sure no one else could have me, to guarantee that I would remain single and emotionally available for your needs. That's not friendship, Jessica. That's possession. That's control. That's abuse." The word abuse hung in the air like a verdict, and I watched as several party guests exchanged glances that confirmed they understood the gravity of what had been revealed. Emma Foster, who had been standing at the edge of the confrontation, stepped forward with an expression of horror and disgust. "My God, Jess," Emma said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Sarah trusted you with everything. We all did. You've been sitting in our friend group for months, listening to her blame herself for things you caused. How could you do that to someone you claimed to love?" The validation from Emma felt like a lifeline in the emotional chaos of the moment. Having someone else articulate the depth of Jessica's betrayal confirmed that I wasn't overreacting or being too harsh in my judgment. What Jessica had done was objectively wrong, inexcusably cruel, and devastating in ways that extended far beyond simple romantic interference. "It wasn't supposed to go on this long," Jessica repeated, as if the duration of her deception was the primary issue rather than the fundamental violation of trust it represented. "At first, I was just screening guys who seemed like players or who weren't serious about commitment. I thought I was protecting you from getting hurt." Her continued attempts to justify her actions as protective rather than possessive demonstrated how thoroughly she had rationalized her behavior to herself. In her twisted logic, preventing me from meeting anyone who showed interest had been an act of friendship rather than sabotage, a way of shielding me from potential disappointment rather than guaranteeing it. "Protecting me from what exactly?" I demanded, pulling out another set of screenshots from my evidence folder, from David Kim, who wanted to take me camping and talked about planning future adventures together, from Alex Rodriguez, who remembered details about my work projects and asked thoughtful questions about my goals, from Marcus Thompson, who offered to cook dinner for me and wanted to introduce me to his friend. Each name I mentioned represented a connection that had held genuine promise, relationships that might have developed into something meaningful if Jessica hadn't intervened with her fake messages and manufactured rejection. The accumulation of lost possibilities felt overwhelming as I articulated them aloud, the scope of what she had stolen from me becoming clear. "You weren't protecting me from players or commitment phobes," I continued, my voice gaining strength as I spoke truth that had been buried under months of her manipulation. "You were protecting yourself from the possibility that I might find someone who made me happy, someone who might become important enough to change our friendship dynamic, someone who might take priority over your emotional needs." The accuracy of my assessment was written across Jessica's face as she struggled to find words that could somehow reframe her actions as anything other than selfish manipulation. The mask of concern and friendship had been completely stripped away, revealing the insecure, possessive person underneath, who had been willing to ensure my unhappiness rather than risk her own abandonment. Mike Thompson appeared at the edge of the gathering, having arrived as promised to provide support during the confrontation's aftermath. His presence reminded me that I had allies who understood the technical aspects of what Jessica had done, people who could corroborate the evidence if she tried to minimize or deny her actions in the future. "The digital forensics are conclusive," Mike said, addressing the group, but looking directly at Jessica, months of systematic account access, fake message creation, and identity theft designed to sabotage romantic connections. This wasn't a few impulsive mistakes, this was a sustained campaign of emotional manipulation that required significant time, effort, and technical skill. His clinical assessment of her behavior added another layer of credibility to my accusations, while highlighting the premeditated nature of her deception. Jessica hadn't acted out of momentary jealousy or confusion. She had executed a months-long plan that required sustained effort and careful coordination. "I have a question," said Tom Bradley, one of our mutual friends from college who had been quietly observing the confrontation. "How many of us have confided in you about personal struggles or relationships over the years? How many times have you positioned yourself as the wise friend offering advice and support while potentially manipulating situations behind the scenes?" His question sent a visible chill through the remaining party guests as they began to consider whether Jessica's manipulation had extended beyond my dating life. The possibility that she had been orchestrating other aspects of our social circle's dynamics was terrifying to contemplate, raising questions about the authenticity of relationships and conflicts that had seemed organic at the time. "I never interfered with anyone else's relationships," Jessica said quickly, perhaps recognizing that accusations of broader manipulation would completely destroy any remaining social connections she might hope to salvage. "This was just about Sarah, just about us." Her claim that the manipulation had been limited to me was meant to be reassuring, but it actually made her actions seem more targeted and personal. She had specifically chosen to abuse someone she claimed to love most, using intimate knowledge of my insecurities in hopes to cause maximum psychological damage while maintaining her facade of friendship. "Just about us," I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "You mean just about controlling me, just about ensuring that I remained emotionally dependent on you regardless of the cost to my happiness or self-worth? Just about prioritizing your fear of abandonment over my right to find love and build meaningful relationships?" The party had effectively ended at this point, with most guests having made polite excuses to leave rather than remain witnesses to such an intensely personal and devastating confrontation. The celebration of Jessica's new home had become the setting for the destruction of her reputation and social standing, an irony that felt like cosmic justice for months of calculated deception. Lisa Park, my sister, arrived just as the crowd was beginning to disperse, having received my text about needing support during a difficult confrontation. Her presence provided another anchor of authenticity in a situation that felt surreal and emotionally overwhelming. "Sarah," Lisa called out as she entered the backyard, taking in the scene of scattered party decorations and the small group of people still gathered around Jessica and me. "What's going on here?" "I'm exposing the truth about why my dating life has been such a disaster," I replied, handing her the evidence folder so she could see the documentation Mike and I had compiled. "It turns out my best friend has been systematically sabotaging my romantic prospects for months while pretending to offer support and advice." Lisa's expression shifted from confusion to horror as she reviewed the screenshots and technical evidence, her anger building as she understood the scope of Jessica's betrayal. As my sister, she had witnessed firsthand the impact of my dating failures on my confidence and emotional well-being, making her particularly qualified to understand the cruelty of what had been done. "This is sick," Lisa said, looking up from the evidence to glare at Jessica with undisguised disgust. "You watched my sister blame herself for months. You listened to her question her worth and desirability while knowing you were the cause of her pain. What kind of person does that to someone they claim to love?" The support from Lisa felt validating and empowering, confirming that my anger and sense of betrayal were justified responses to genuinely abusive behavior. Having family present during this confrontation added weight to the revelation while ensuring that Jessica couldn't later try to minimize or reframe what had happened. "I made a mistake," Jessica said, her voice barely audible as she struggled to find words that could somehow salvage the situation. "A huge mistake that got out of control, but Sarah, our friendship has always been real. Everything else between us has been genuine." Her attempt to compartmentalize the manipulation as separate from our authentic friendship demonstrated how little she understood about the interconnected nature of trust and emotional intimacy. The idea that she could systematically deceive me about something so fundamental while maintaining that other aspects of our relationship were genuine was logically and emotionally absurd. Nothing about our friendship was real, I replied with a finality that surprised me with its certainty. Every Tuesday morning coffee date where you listened to me analyze failed connections, every evening where you offered comfort and advice about my dating disasters, every conversation where you helped me process my disappointment and self-doubt, all of it was performance, Jessica. All of it was lies designed to cover up your role in causing the very pain you pretended to help me heal. The comprehensive nature of her deception was becoming clearer as I articulated it aloud. She hadn't just interfered with my romantic prospects, she had weaponized our entire friendship to serve her emotional needs, while causing me to become increasingly dependent on her support and guidance. Emma Foster, who had remained throughout the confrontation despite the obvious discomfort of witnessing such personal drama, stepped forward with a question that cut to the heart of the situation. Jess, do you understand that what you did was abusive? Emma asked, her voice gentle but firm. Do you recognize that using someone's trust to manipulate their life while positioning yourself as their support system is a form of psychological abuse that has probably caused lasting damage? The direct question forced Jessica to confront the reality of her actions, without the buffer of rationalization or justification. Her face crumpled as the weight of what she had done seemed to finally penetrate her defensive emotional barrier. I didn't think of it that way, she whispered, though the claim seemed hollow given the sustained and deliberate nature of her campaign. I just didn't want to lose the most important friendship in my life. Her confession that our friendship was the most important relationship in her life provided crucial insight into her motivations, while highlighting the toxic nature of her emotional dependence. She had been willing to ensure my isolation and unhappiness rather than risk the possibility that I might find fulfillment elsewhere. If I was so important to you, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion and grief, then why couldn't you trust that our friendship was strong enough to survive me finding love? Why couldn't you believe that having someone special in my life might actually make me happier and therefore a better friend to you? The question struck at the fundamental insecurity that had driven her actions, the fear that she wasn't valuable enough to maintain important relationships once people had other options for emotional connection. Her inability to trust in her own worth had led her to ensure that I remained isolated and dependent rather than supporting my growth and happiness. Mike stepped forward with his laptop, having compiled additional evidence during the confrontation that further demonstrated the scope of Jessica's deception. Sarah, I've been analyzing the timing patterns of the sabotage, he said, showing me data that made my stomach turn. The fake messages weren't just random interference, they were strategically timed to coincide with your emotional vulnerability. She would sabotage connections right after you had shared excitement or hope about them, maximizing the psychological impact of the disappointment. The revelation that Jessica had deliberately timed her sabotage to cause maximum emotional damage was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire situation. It demonstrated a level of calculated cruelty that went beyond simple possessiveness into something approaching sadistic manipulation. You specifically targeted moments when I was hopeful and excited, I said, looking at Jessica with a mixture of horror and disbelief. You waited until I had invested emotionally in potential connections before destroying them. You engineered my disappointment for maximum impact. Jessica's inability to respond to this accusation was perhaps the most damning evidence of her guilt. The strategic timing of her sabotage revealed that her actions had been deliberate attempts to cause psychological harm rather than misguided attempts at protection. The confrontation had reached its natural conclusion, with Jessica's deception fully exposed, and her motivations laid bare for everyone to understand. The woman I had trusted most in the world stood before me broken and revealed, her carefully constructed facade shattered beyond any possibility of repair. I want you to understand something, I said, my voice carrying the weight of finality as I prepared to end this chapter of my life. This isn't just about the dating sabotage, this is about fundamental questions of character, integrity and the capacity for authentic relationship. Someone who could sustain this level of deception while maintaining a facade of friendship is someone I can never trust again about anything. The comprehensive nature of my rejection seemed to finally break through Jessica's remaining defenses, and she collapsed into one of the patio chairs with her face in her hands. The reality of losing not just our friendship but her entire social network was beginning to sink in. As I prepared to leave the party that had become the setting for such a devastating revelation, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at finally understanding the source of my dating failures, anger at the months of manipulation and emotional abuse, grief for the friendship I had thought we shared. But underneath all of these feelings was something unexpected and powerful: a sense of liberation from relationships and situations that had never been authentic. "The evidence will be documented and saved," I announced to the remaining group, ensuring that Jessica understood there would be consequences for her actions, beyond just the loss of our friendship. "If anyone wants copies of the technical proof for their own protection or peace of mind, Mike can provide them." The offer to share evidence with others was both practical and symbolic, ensuring that Jessica's capacity for manipulation would be known within our social circle while giving people the information they needed to make informed decisions about their own relationships with her. Lisa and I walked toward the front of the house together, leaving behind the wreckage of what had once been my most important friendship. The evening air felt crisp and clean after the emotional intensity of the confrontation, and I found myself breathing deeply for the first time in hours. "How are you feeling?" Lisa asked, as we reached my car, her concern evident in her voice and expression. "Heartbroken but free," I replied, surprised by the accuracy of that description. "It's devastating to lose someone I loved so much, but liberating to finally understand that the problem was never me." The drive home through the quiet streets of Cedar Park and back toward East Austin felt like traveling between different worlds, leaving behind the suburban setting where I had been systematically betrayed and returning to the urban environment where I could begin rebuilding my life on authentic foundation. 3 months later, I sat in a different coffee shop across from David Kim, the software engineer who had been one of Jessica's early victims. Mike's investigation had uncovered contact information for several of the men whose interest had been sabotaged, and I had reached out to explain what had happened and apologize for the confusing messages they had received. David had been understanding and curious about meeting for a real conversation, freed from the interference that had prevented our original connection from developing. Our coffee date was everything I had hoped for months earlier, filled with genuine laughter, intellectual chemistry, and the comfortable ease of two people discovering mutual interest. "I have to ask," David said as we prepared to leave the coffee shop and extend our conversation over dinner, "wasn't it risky to reach out after all this time? How did you know I would be interested in hearing from you again?" His question made me smile as I considered how much my perspective on dating and relationships had changed since the confrontation with Jessica. I learned that the biggest risk isn't putting yourself out there and facing potential rejection, I replied. "The biggest risk is allowing other people to control your story and define your possibilities, without even knowing they're doing it." The wisdom felt hard-earned, purchased with months of manipulation and self-doubt that had ultimately led to a deeper understanding of my own worth and the importance of authentic relationships. Jessica's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also forced me to develop stronger boundaries, better judgment, and clearer priorities about what I wanted from both friendship and romance. David's smile in response to my answer felt like validation that the lessons I had learned were leading me toward healthier connections and better outcomes. The woman who had doubted her own desirability and questioned her ability to maintain romantic interest was gone, replaced by someone who understood that authentic connections required honesty, respect, and mutual support, rather than manipulation and control. As we walked toward the restaurant where we would continue our conversation, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The systematic sabotage that had seemed like evidence of my own inadequacy had actually been the catalyst for discovering my strength, resilience, and capacity for growth. Sometimes the worst betrayals force the most important revelations about who we really were and what we truly deserved from the people in our lives. The investigation that had begun with suspicious dating patterns had evolved into a comprehensive understanding of manipulation, trust, and the importance of maintaining authentic relationships in all areas of life. Jessica's deception had been cruel and damaging, but it had also taught me invaluable lessons about recognizing red flags, setting boundaries, and trusting my own instincts when something felt wrong. The woman walking into dinner with someone who appreciated her authentic self was fundamentally different from the one who had sat in Brew Bytes months earlier, analyzing failed connections while the person responsible sat across from her offering false comfort. The transformation had been painful but necessary, leading to a life built on truth rather than carefully maintained illusion. The aftermath of that confrontation at Jessica's housewarming party rippled through my life like stones thrown into still water, creating waves of change that extended far beyond the immediate drama of that Cedar Park evening. In the days following her public exposure, I found myself navigating a completely transformed social landscape where relationships I had taken for granted suddenly required reevaluation, and where my own sense of identity underwent a fundamental reconstruction. The first challenge came in the form of mutual friends who struggled to process what they had witnessed. Emma Foster called me the morning after the party, her voice shaky with confusion and disbelief as she tried to reconcile the Jessica she thought she knew with the manipulative person who had been exposed. "I keep thinking about all the times she offered advice about relationships," Emma said during our hour-long conversation that felt more like a therapy session than casual friend check. "How many of our decisions were influenced by someone who was actively sabotaging people she claimed to care about? It makes me question everything I thought I knew about friendship and trust." Her words echoed my own struggles with the psychological aftermath of such a profound betrayal. The revelation that someone could maintain such an elaborate facade while systematically causing harm forced me to reconsider not just my relationship with Jessica, but my ability to judge character and recognize authentic versus manipulative behavior in others. Over the following weeks, I received messages from several other women in our extended social circle who had begun to question their own interactions with Jessica. Sarah Mitchell, who had been part of our college group, reached out to share that Jessica had offered similar protective advice about men she had been interested in, always with explanations that seemed wise and caring at the time but now felt suspiciously designed to undermine potential connection. "She convinced me that this guy I really liked was probably just looking for something casual," Sarah told me during a coffee meeting that felt surreal in its similarity to the conversations I had shared with Jessica herself. "She had all these psychological insights about his behavior that made me doubt whether pursuing anything with him was worth the risk. I ended up pulling back, and he probably thought I wasn't interested." The possibility that Jessica's manipulation had extended beyond my dating life was both validating and horrifying. It suggested that her need to control and undermine had been a pattern rather than an isolated incident, affecting multiple people who had trusted her judgment and advice about their romantic prospects. Mike Thompson proved invaluable during this period of investigation and discovery, using his technical expertise to help other potential victims trace their own digital interactions and identify any suspicious activity. What we uncovered was a web of subtle manipulation that was far more extensive than I had initially realized. "She was remarkably sophisticated in her approach," Mike explained as we reviewed evidence from multiple sources. "The manipulation was rarely direct or obvious. Instead, she would plant seeds of doubt, offer explanations that seemed rational but were designed to discourage pursuit of promising connections, and position herself as the wise friend who understood people and situations better than the people actually involved." The systematic nature of her psychological manipulation was perhaps more disturbing than the technical sabotage of my dating account. She had weaponized her intelligence, emotional perceptiveness, and social skills to control multiple people's romantic prospects while maintaining her image as a supportive and insightful friend. As news of the confrontation spread through our social network, I found myself becoming an inadvertent advocate for recognizing and addressing manipulative behavior in close relationships. People began reaching out not just about Jessica specifically, but about other relationships and situations where they had felt confused by outcomes that didn't match their expectations or effort. The experience taught me that manipulation often thrives in environments where people are reluctant to question the motives of those they trust, where loyalty and friendship are assumed to preclude the possibility of deliberate harm. Jessica had exploited exactly this blind spot, using our affection and trust as cover for behavior that would have been immediately recognizable as abusive if it had come from a stranger or obvious enemy. 3 weeks after the party, I received an unexpected call from Jessica herself. Her number appeared on my phone screen at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday evening,
the same time we used to have our regular check-in conversations, and I debated whether to answer or let it go to voicemail. Curiosity ultimately won out over the desire to avoid further drama, and I answered the call with a guarded hello that conveyed none of the warmth that had characterized our previous interaction. Sarah, Jessica's voice was subdued and shaky, lacking the confident energy that had always made her such a compelling presence.
I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I needed to try to explain. Her attempt to offer explanations weeks after her public exposure felt both too little and too late, but I found myself willing to listen if only to gain additional insight into the psychology that had driven her actions. "I'm listening," I said simply, settling into my couch and preparing for what I suspected would be another attempt at rationalization or deflection. "I've been seeing a therapist," Jessica continued, and I could hear tears in her voice despite her efforts to maintain composure. "Trying to understand why I did what I did, why I was willing to hurt someone I genuinely loved, rather than face my own insecurities about abandonment and inadequacy." The mention of therapy suggested that she was at least attempting to take responsibility for her actions and understand the underlying issues that had driven them. But I remained skeptical about whether someone capable of such sustained deception was truly committed to honest self-examination. "What did you learn?" I asked, genuinely curious about what professional analysis might reveal about her motivations and mindset. "That I've been confusing love with control for most of my life," she admitted with a rawness that seemed more authentic than anything she had said during our confrontation. "That my fear of being abandoned or replaced was so intense that I was willing to ensure other people's isolation rather than work on my own self-worth and ability to maintain relationships through genuine connection rather than manipulation." Her analysis was surprisingly perceptive and aligned with my own understanding of what had driven her behavior. The recognition that she had confused love with control was particularly significant because it suggested awareness of the fundamental dysfunction that had characterized not just her treatment of me but likely most of her close relationship. "The therapist helped me understand that what I did to you wasn't protection or misguided friendship," Jessica continued. "It was abuse. Systematic emotional abuse designed to keep you dependent and isolated for my own psychological comfort. And I need you to know that I understand that now, even if understanding it doesn't undo the damage I caused." Her willingness to use the word abuse felt significant, representing a level of accountability that had been absent during our initial confrontation. The acknowledgement that her actions had been deliberately harmful rather than misguided attempts at friendship suggested genuine insight rather than continued rationalization. "Why are you telling me?" I asked, curious about her motivations for reaching out when she had to know that our friendship was irreparably damaged. "Because you deserve to hear that none of it was your fault," she replied without hesitation. "Because you deserve to know that the person who questioned her worth and desirability for months was responding normally to abnormal circumstances. Because you deserve an apology that acknowledges the full scope of what I did rather than minimizing it as a mistake or momentary lapse in judgment." Her words addressed directly the psychological damage that had been perhaps the most painful aspect of her betrayal: the months of self-doubt and diminished confidence that had resulted from her systematic sabotage. Hearing her acknowledge that my reactions had been normal responses to deliberate manipulation felt validating in ways I hadn't expected. "I don't expect forgiveness," Jessica continued. "I don't expect our friendship to be repaired or for you to trust me again. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did, and that I'm committed to making sure I never hurt anyone this way again." Her explicit statement that she didn't expect forgiveness or reconciliation felt important because it suggested that her apology was motivated by genuine remorse rather than hope for personal benefit. The acknowledgement that our friendship was over allowed me to receive her words without feeling pressured to respond with premature absolution. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Jessica providing details about her therapy process and the insights she had gained about the patterns of manipulation and control that had characterized her relationship. She spoke about her childhood experiences of feeling overlooked and abandoned, her fear that people would leave her if they had better options, and the twisted logic that had led her to believe that ensuring other people's isolation was preferable to risking her own abandonment. "The most disturbing thing I learned," she said near the end of our conversation, "is how good I became at rationalizing behavior I knew was wrong. I convinced myself that I was protecting you, that I understood men and relationships better than you did, that I was saving you from disappointment and heartbreak. But the truth is that I was just too scared to let you find happiness that didn't center around me. Her acknowledgement of the rationalization process was perhaps the most valuable insight she shared, because it highlighted how people could convince themselves that harmful behavior served benevolent purpose. The recognition that her protective narrative had been elaborate self-deception rather than genuine concern suggested real psychological growth. When the call ended, I felt a complex mixture of closure and continued sadness about the loss of what I had believed to be my most important friendship. Jessica's apology and insights couldn't undo the months of manipulation and emotional damage, but they provided context that helped me understand her actions without excusing them. The following months brought unexpected opportunities for growth and connection that might never have emerged if Jessica's sabotage had continued indefinitely. My relationship with David Kim developed into something genuinely meaningful, built on honest communication and mutual respect rather than the careful image management that had characterized my interactions with Jessica. David's perspective on the situation was both supportive and illuminating, offering insights from someone who had been directly affected by Jessica's manipulation, but remained outside the emotional complexity of our friendship. "What strikes me most about the whole situation," he said during one of our regular hiking dates in the Greenbelt, "is how much energy and intelligence she devoted to maintaining control rather than building genuine connection. She was clearly a smart, charismatic person who could have had meaningful relationships if she had been willing to be vulnerable and authentic instead of manipulative and controlling." His observation highlighted one of the most tragic aspects of Jessica's behavior: the waste of genuine talents and positive qualities in service of destructive patterns that ultimately isolated her from the very connections she claimed to value most. My professional life also benefited from the confidence and self-advocacy skills I had developed through the process of investigating and confronting Jessica's betrayal. The analytical thinking and boundary-setting abilities that had helped me uncover the truth about my dating failures proved valuable in client relationships and workplace dynamics, where I might previously have accepted unsatisfactory situations rather than asserting my needs and standards. Emma Foster and I grew closer through our shared experience of having our trust violated by someone we had considered a close friend. Our conversations about recognizing manipulation and maintaining healthy boundaries became the foundation for a friendship that felt more authentic and balanced than my relationship with Jessica had ever been. "I think one of the reasons Jessica was able to manipulate us for so long," Emma reflected during one of our regular lunch meetings, "is that we associated questioning someone's motives with being disloyal or paranoid. We were taught that good friends give each other the benefit of the doubt, but we weren't taught how to recognize when that benefit was being exploited." Her insight captured something important about the social conditioning that made manipulation possible: the cultural emphasis on trust and loyalty that could prevent people from recognizing when those values were being weaponized against them. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a message through LinkedIn from Marcus Thompson, one of the men whose interest Jessica had sabotaged early in her campaign. He had heard about the situation through mutual connections and wanted to express his appreciation for my courage in exposing what had happened. "Your decision to investigate and confront that situation probably prevented other people from being manipulated in similar ways," he wrote. "It takes real strength to face the possibility that someone you trust has been betraying you, and even more strength to hold them accountable publicly when you could have handled it privately to avoid embarrassment." His message highlighted an aspect of the situation I hadn't fully considered: the possibility that my public confrontation had served as protection for others who might have become targets of Jessica's manipulation. The decision to expose her behavior rather than handle it privately had felt necessary for my own healing, but it had also created accountability that might prevent future victims. The experience fundamentally changed my approach to relationships and trust, not by making me more suspicious or guarded, but by teaching me to pay attention to patterns and inconsistencies that I might have previously dismissed as unimportant. I learned to distinguish between healthy vulnerability and naive willingness to ignore red flags, between supportive friendship and subtle attempts at control or manipulation. 1 year later, I found myself in a completely transformed life that felt more authentic and fulfilling than anything I had experienced during my friendship with Jessica. My relationship with David had progressed to living together, with conversations about marriage and shared future plans that felt grounded in genuine compatibility rather than projected fantasy. My professional success had expanded through opportunities that required confidence and self-advocacy, skills that had been strengthened rather than weakened by the experience of confronting betrayal and rebuilding my life on more solid foundation. Most importantly, my social circle now consisted of people who demonstrated their care through support for my growth and happiness rather than subtle attempts to limit my options or control my choices. The relationships I maintained were characterized by reciprocity, honesty, and respect for boundaries rather than the emotional manipulation and psychological dependency that had defined my friendship with Jessica. The woman who had sat in coffee shops analyzing failed romantic connections while her best friend offered false comfort and secretly sabotaged her prospects was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept relationships that required her to be less than her authentic self. During a dinner party at my shared apartment with David, surrounded by friends who celebrated my successes and supported my ambitions, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The betrayal that had initially felt like evidence of my own inadequacy had ultimately forced me to develop stronger boundaries, better judgment, and clearer priorities about what I wanted from both friendship and romance. "You know what's interesting about the whole Jessica situation?" Lisa asked during a quiet moment in the kitchen as we prepared dessert for our guests. "It's that her worst impulses ended up creating the best possible outcome for you. If she hadn't been so threatened by your potential happiness, you might have settled for less fulfilling relationships and never developed the confidence to demand what you actually deserve." Her observation captured something profound about the unexpected ways that betrayal and hardship could serve as catalysts for growth and positive change. Jessica's manipulation had been cruel and damaging, but it had also forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my own patterns of accepting less than I deserved in relationships. The transformation hadn't been easy or painless, but it had been thorough and lasting. The person who now stood in her own kitchen, surrounded by authentic friendships and genuine love, was fundamentally different from the one who had trusted blindly and questioned her own worth when relationships failed to develop. As I served dessert to friends who knew my full story and loved me for exactly who I was, I felt gratitude for the difficult lessons that had led to this moment. The betrayal that had once felt like the end of my ability to trust had actually been the beginning of my journey toward relationships built on honesty, respect, and genuine mutual support. Jessica's sabotage had been designed to keep me isolated and dependent, but its ultimate effect had been to force me to develop the strength and wisdom necessary for truly meaningful connection. The investigation that had begun with suspicious dating patterns had evolved into a comprehensive understanding of manipulation, authenticity, and the importance of maintaining relationships that honored rather than diminished my worth. Standing in my kitchen that evening, surrounded by laughter and genuine warmth, I understood that sometimes the people who try to control our stories end up providing exactly the catalyst we need to write better endings than we could have imagined. The woman who had questioned her desirability and blamed herself for failures she hadn't caused was now someone who understood that authentic love required truth, respect, and the courage to demand relationships worthy of her genuine self. 2 years had passed since that transformative evening in Cedar Park, and I found myself sitting in the exact coffee shop where Jessica and I used to dissect my dating failures, but this time the conversation was entirely different. Across from me sat Rachel Martinez, a 25-year-old marketing coordinator who had reached out after hearing my story through our professional network. Her situation was eerily familiar yet uniquely her own. "I keep thinking I'm being paranoid," Rachel said, nervously, stirring her latte as she described the pattern of romantic disappointments that had plagued her for months. "But my best friend always seems to have explanations for why things don't work out, and she's always there to comfort me afterward. The timing feels too convenient, but I can't imagine someone I trust so completely would deliberately hurt me." Listening to Rachel articulate the same doubts and confusion I had experienced felt like looking into a mirror that reflected my past self. The hesitancy to believe that someone so close could be capable of systematic betrayal, the tendency to blame herself for failures that seemed statistically improbable, the gratitude for a friend who always had answers and comfort readily available. "Trust your instincts," I told her, sharing the hard-won wisdom that had emerged from my own painful experience. "When patterns feel wrong, they usually are. the people who love us, shouldn't need to control our options to maintain their importance in our lives. Over the past 2 years, I had become an unexpected resource for people navigating similar situations of subtle manipulation and emotional abuse within close relationships. The story of Jessica's elaborate deception had spread through professional and social networks, creating awareness about forms of betrayal that often went unrecognized because they came disguised as care and concern. My relationship with David had evolved into something deeper and more stable than I had previously believed possible. We had moved in together after 8 months of dating, and our shared apartment in East Austin had become a gathering place for friends who appreciated the authenticity and openness that characterized our social circle. The contrast between my current relationships and my former dynamic with Jessica couldn't have been more stark. David encouraged my professional ambitions, celebrated my successes without feeling threatened, and supported my independence rather than trying to create dependence. Our friends were people who demonstrated their affection through genuine support rather than subtle attempts to limit options or control outcomes. "You know what I realized recently?" David said during one of our evening walks through the neighborhood, a routine that had become sacred time for processing daily experiences and planning future adventures. "Jessica's manipulation probably delayed your recognition of your own worth by years. If she hadn't been sabotaging your dating life, you might have found confidence and happiness much sooner." His observation touched on something I had been contemplating as well: the ripple effects of manipulation that extended far beyond the immediate damage to romantic prospects. Jessica's systematic undermining had affected my professional confidence, my willingness to take risks, and my overall sense of agency in creating the life I wanted. But there was another side to that analysis that felt equally important to acknowledge. The experience of uncovering and confronting such profound betrayal had forced me to develop skills and perspectives that might never have emerged under easier circumstances. The analytical thinking, boundary-setting abilities, and emotional resilience that had served me so well in recent years had been forged in the crucible of discovering that my closest friendship was built on lies. My career at Pulse Media had flourished as I applied the investigative skills and confident communication style that had emerged from the Jessica situation. I had been promoted to senior digital strategist and was leading campaigns for major clients who valued my ability to identify patterns, ask difficult questions, and advocate for approaches that prioritized authentic engagement over superficial metrics. The professional success felt especially meaningful because it was built on capabilities I had discovered within myself rather than achievements that could be attributed to external support or favorable circumstances. The woman who had questioned her own judgment and abilities was now someone whose insights were sought by industry leaders and whose strategic thinking drove significant business outcomes. Emma Foster and I had maintained our friendship, strengthened by the shared experience of navigating the aftermath of Jessica's betrayal. Our relationship had become a model for the kind of mutual support that honored individual growth, rather than trying to limit or control it. "I think about Jessica sometimes," Emma admitted during one of our monthly dinner dates, a tradition we had established to maintain connection without falling into the intense, emotional dependency that had characterized some of our previous friendship. "Not with anger anymore, but with sadness about the person she could have been if she had been willing to work on her insecurities instead of managing them through manipulation." Her perspective reflected the complex emotional processing that had been necessary to move beyond the immediate hurt and anger toward a more nuanced understanding of the situation. Jessica's actions had been inexcusable and harmful, but they had also been driven by psychological pain and insecurity that commanded some degree of compassion even while requiring firm boundaries. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that Jessica had continued therapy and had moved to Denver for a fresh start in a city where her reputation wasn't defined by the exposure of her manipulative behavior. Reports suggested that she was working to build healthier relationships and had gained significant insight into the patterns that had driven her actions. While I felt glad that she was apparently committed to personal growth, I maintained clear boundaries about any potential reconnection. The trust that had been broken couldn't be rebuilt,
and the psychological damage she had caused required ongoing protection from further harm. Forgiveness, I had learned, didn't require resuming relationships with people who had demonstrated their capacity for systematic deception. The anniversary of our confrontation had passed without fanfare or emotional upheaval, marking how thoroughly I had processed the experience and integrated its lessons into my ongoing life. The date that had once represented devastating betrayal now served as a reminder of personal strength and the importance of trusting intuition even when it challenged comfortable assumptions. Rachel's situation, which had brought me back to this coffee shop for our consultation, reminded me that manipulative behavior in close relationships was more common than most people realize. The combination of emotional intelligence, intimate knowledge, and psychological insecurity that had driven Jessica's actions existed in many people who used their understanding of others to serve their own needs, rather than provide genuine support. The hardest part, Rachel continued, is imagining that someone I've shared everything with could be using that information against me. It makes me question my ability to judge character and wonder what other relationships in my life might not be what they seem. Her words captured the secondary trauma that often accompanied the discovery of intimate betrayal. The way that learning about one person's deception could undermine confidence in all relationships and create a generalized suspicion that was almost as damaging as the original manipulation. That questioning phase is normal and temporary, I assured her, drawing from my own experience and the insights I had gained from helping others in similar situations. It's your mind's way of protecting you while you develop better skills for recognizing authentic versus manipulative behavior. The goal isn't to become suspicious of everyone, but to become more discerning about the difference between genuine care and subtle control. The conversation with Rachel continued for nearly 2 hours, covering practical strategies for gathering evidence, emotional preparation for potential confrontation, and plans for rebuilding confidence and social connections, regardless of what her investigation revealed. By the time we parted ways, she seemed more grounded and determined, equipped with tools and perspectives that might help her navigate her situation more effectively than I had initially managed mine. Driving home through the familiar streets of Austin, I reflected on how my response to being manipulated had evolved into a form of service to others facing similar challenges. The pain and confusion that had once felt like purely personal suffering had been transformed into wisdom and support that could benefit people trapped in similar situations. David was preparing dinner when I arrived home, and the sight of him moving comfortably through our shared kitchen filled me with gratitude for the relationship we had built on foundations of honesty, respect, and mutual encouragement. The contrast between this easy intimacy and the careful performance that had characterized my interactions with Jessica was a daily reminder of what authentic connection actually felt like. "How did the conversation with Rachel go?" he asked, knowing that I had been looking forward to helping someone whose story resonated so strongly with my own experience. "Heartbreaking and hopeful," I replied, settling onto one of our bar stools to watch him cook and process the afternoon's emotional intensity. "She's dealing with almost exactly what I went through, but she's asking the right questions earlier in the process. I think she has a better chance of protecting herself before the damage becomes as extensive as mine was." We talked about the patterns we had both observed in manipulative relationships, the way that controlling behavior often disguised itself as care and protection, and the importance of creating social circles that valued independence and growth rather than dependency and limitation. "I've been thinking about something," David said as we sat down to dinner, his expression thoughtful in the way that indicated he had been processing an idea for some time. "Would you ever consider writing about your experience? Not just helping individuals like Rachel, but creating something that could reach people who might not otherwise recognize what's happening to them?" His suggestion sparked immediate interest because it aligned with thoughts I had been having about the broader implications of my experience. The discovery that intimate manipulation was more common than most people realized, combined with the skills I had developed for recognizing and addressing it, seemed like knowledge that could benefit a wider audience. "I think there's a book in this," I said, the idea crystallizing as I spoke. "Not just a personal memoir, but a practical guide for recognizing manipulation in close relationships and rebuilding life on more authentic foundations. Something that could help people avoid the months of self-doubt and emotional damage that I experienced. The concept felt like a natural evolution of the informal counseling I had been providing to people like Rachel, a way to systematize and share the insights that had emerged from my painful but ultimately transformative experience. Over the following weeks, I began outlining what would eventually become Hidden Enemies, Recognizing Manipulation in Close Relationships, a book that combined personal narrative with practical strategies for identifying and addressing subtle forms of emotional abuse. The writing process proved to be another layer of healing, requiring me to examine my experience from multiple angles and extract lessons that could serve readers facing their own challenges with manipulative friends, family members, or romantic partners. The book's publication 18 months later marked the completion of a journey that had begun with suspicious dating patterns and evolved into comprehensive understanding of trust, authenticity, and the skills necessary for maintaining healthy relationships. The positive response from readers who recognized their own situations in my story confirmed that Jessica's manipulation had been part of a much larger pattern of behavior that affected countless people. Standing at a bookstore reading where I was signing copies for people who had found hope and practical guidance in my story, I felt the full circle nature of the transformation that had begun in that Cedar Park backyard. The woman who had been manipulated and controlled had become someone whose strength and wisdom could protect and empower others facing similar challenges. The experience with Jessica had been devastating and traumatic, but it had also been the catalyst for developing capabilities and insights that now served not just my own life, but the lives of others who needed to understand that manipulation, disguised as care, was still manipulation, and that authentic relationships required honesty, even when honesty was difficult. The journey from victim to survivor to advocate had taken nearly 4 years, but each phase had built upon the previous one to create a life that was more fulfilling and meaningful than anything I could have imagined during those months of confusion and self-doubt. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.